Satnam. I'm Lillian Savoy at Awaken Change podcast, and I'm so excited to have my exceptional guest, Cat Howell with Flow Protocols. Welcome, Cat.
Hello. So excited to be here.
I like your warm blanket today. So tell us, you're in New Zealand. So what is the temperature there?
It's actually pretty nice. I just noticed that you can fully see my boobs. That's why I put it over.
Oh, those are nice boobs.
It's like when I was putting this on, I didn't realize I was like, I don't feel like anyone's going to be able to focus on my words when my boobs are out to play. So I was like, okay, the shamanic blanket's coming out. It's actually not cold.
That's so great because definitely I'm small breasted, but definitely even when I have a tank top on or a push up bra, Andre and we cannot have a conversation. All he sees is boob.
I don't blame
So,
him. I'd be doing the same too. So yeah.
yeah, I
Eyes on
think you're
you,
right.
eyes on
So,
you. Yeah.
okay, well, we have matching blankets. And so, wool is very grounding and very spiritual. And also, it allows us to connect to the natural fibers of the earth. So, for anybody who doesn't have a wool blanket, you might want to get one because it does bring in a different kind of energy on the wool blanket. So that's why a lot of yogis use the wool blanket in practice, is it brings you back to the earth and grounds you.
Oh, I love that. That's exactly why I put it on then. Let's go with that. I knew exactly what I was doing.
Okay,
Yeah.
so today we are getting all into, hopefully, if the internet allows us, we did a little prayer to ground us because we're having internet troubles today. But hopefully today we are going to get into um, your story and how, not your story, but how people get into their story and how you are personally helping me, my husband, and several people, hundreds of people, get out of their story and into a new story and make money while you're doing that story. Whether you want to be a tap dancer on Broadway or you want to be an author, there is no funnel that technically that you're putting us in, right? We can be whoever we want to be.
Yeah, totally. That is the superpower, the gift, the thing that sets us apart from every other species on this planet is that we can step outside of biological bounds. There's really no boxes or frameworks because we are in control of an imagination. Well, that's an interesting word. I don't think a lot of us are in control of our imagination, but we have an imagination and therefore we have the capacity to rewrite and recreate our stories. And the stories that we tell ourselves, well, these form the basis of our identity, they are the basis of our beliefs, and they are self-perpetuating. They become the very experience of reality that we have. So when we intentionally decide to look at the stories that we're telling ourselves and work on those or narrate new ones, we can change and alter the very fiber of our circumstances and our reality. Yeah.
I love
Thanks
that.
for coming to my TED Talk. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Hope you
it.
enjoyed the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, one of our story, like since Andre and I are doing your mentoring together, I wanted to have you on the show because it's fun to use, my bad habits as good examples for other people not to do them. Right.
Yeah.
And And the fun thing about doing it with your spouse is that you get to call each other out on your own stories.
Mm. Yeah.
So and Andre and I are kind of open, he's been with you for a long time through digital marketing and now I definitely want you to tell us about what you do now, but we talk about you a lot in the house because he'll be like, "Ooh, Lillian, that sounds like an interesting story you got going on there." Or I'll be like, "That is such an old story." Can we
Right.
get rid of that? And
Yeah.
it usually comes up around money or what we can and can't allow ourselves to do. So, what do you think about that? Like if, getting out of the box, like
Mm.
how do we get out of the box of our story? Like how do we catch ourselves? What do you recommend?
Yeah. So it's not obvious when you're in it. And so it requires a lot of intentional intention. It requires intention and it requires the willpower. So usually willpower will only engage once there is a tension point, i.e., emotional reds or chaos that you're experiencing in your life, as in your financial situation is just stressing you the fuck out, or your love life is just not working, or you're really shaming yourself and your body, and then that creates the discernment of what you desire. That emotional red, by the way, is just defined as any emotional state that doesn't feel good in your body, so it drains you of energy. So frustration, confusion, depression, anxiety, grief are emotional reds. So the emotional red is the first piece of discerning the or creating the discernment of the desire of what you actually want, right? Because how do you know you want freedom unless you felt trapped or unless you feel stuck? How do you know you want more peace of mind unless you feel stressed out and you or an anxiety? How do you know you want more love or connection unless you feel isolated and disconnected and lonely? So the tension point is what creates kind of like what Esther Hicks called this rocket of desire. It creates the discernment of what you actually want, the emotional green that you're trying to create for yourself. And if if you've been at this work for a while, or you're really intentional about how you're creating your reality and your emotional states, so you know how to regulate your emotional states, you know how to create those states unconditional of external circumstances, you can actually use that moment of discernment to go, what I want is freedom. Let's focus myself on freedom and let's find things that make me feel free. Let's create worlds in my imagination where I am experiencing freedom. And off you go into the sunset. You start to attract and experience a reality of more freedom. You start to attract situations, opportunities that smell of that resonance and support the whole thing. Now, on paper, that's the ideal way to do it, but it's like really rare that people are going to do it that way. Usually it goes down where things just get so intense, the chaos, the contrasting experience, that is what creates the desire to shift the way that you're thinking and to shift the way that you're behaving. So when you have that discernment of, okay, I want to create more financial freedom, that is a story that you're going to have to change along the way, or many stories that you're going to have to change along the way. Because if you're in a position right now where things are month to month, you're living month to month, or you never, how do people say, like, you never have money at the end of your month, or whatever that saying goes, or you're deep in debt and you're frustrated, or you're just making ends meet all the time, that is a story that you are telling yourself. That many stories. I suck with money. Money is hard. Money is not safe. Money leaves me. It's a player. It doesn't love me. And so when you decide to create financial freedom for yourself, to have more than enough, to have consistency in your revenues, to have surpluses, then those stories must change. Because how can you perceive freedom? How can you be connected? How can you speak and behave about this financial freedom while you are still believing in a focus point, in a perspective of there's a lack, it's not safe, it's evil, or whatever that might whatever stories you might have around there. So it is about intentionally changing the stories that you're telling yourself, and usually the desire to do that comes from sort of a contrasting experience that creates a tension point where you're like, I've had enough. I am changing my story around this. And so this is definitely what I mean, I teach about money because money is the relationship that most people struggle with on this planet. And so ch- if you can shift your relationship to money and the stories around that, you can literally shift any part of your life. I mean, the same is true for any other relationship, but money is the one where most people get stuck on. But this applies to love life, this applies to your body, to everything. And even though I teach this stuff, I have my own stories. Like, I am always constantly learning. I don't know everything there is to know about money. It never ends. There's no point where it's like you've learned everything you need to learn about life and you've reached the border of emotional greens. You cannot feel more love now. You cannot feel more freedom. That doesn't exist. So it's a lifelong journey. But some of the stories that I have experienced in my life that I shared recently with you guys was around savings and consistency. I think there's a big story. I don't know if your audience are entrepreneurs or founders, but in the
A lot of
entrepreneurial
them are,
space,
yes.
yeah, okay. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of stories around money is inconsistent. Entrepreneurship is inconsistent. 1 month you'll go here, 1 month you'll go there. And then we just kind of accept it because it's just what everyone else is saying. And then that becomes your experience. So I had a story around that. And then I had stories around savings, how um, saving or, especially consistency and savings. So, I just started a water fast, and that was on the back of me doing a month-long ritual where I committed to consistent daily actions. And prior to doing this ritual, I really didn't like the word consistency because it felt like I've never been diagnosed, but I suspect I have what people might call ADHD. The word consistency always felt like a prison,
It does.
boring, just boring, I don't wanna do that. So I struggled to have consistency financially, I struggled to have it in my business, I struggle because I had this story that consistency was boring, that it was like, it doesn't work on an ADHD brain. I experienced a reality where things like sticking to a diet, I was super inconsistent in my weight, inconsistent in my business. If you've been following my journey, it's like I get an idea and then I swap and I change and I'm like, now I want to do this. And and in many ways, it's a superpower. And that was a story I told myself that's why it worked. That's
Yeah,
why I managed to still make money operating that way, because I also had a story that said ADHD is a superpower.
it is. Yeah.
But I I am at a stage in my life, and I don't know if it's old age, where the tension point of inconsistent revenues, I reached a point with it where I was like, "You know what? I'm actually kinda done with this. What's the
Same.
story I'm telling myself around this? Oh, that entrepreneurship is inconsistent. Okay, well, let me reach for a new one. Let me choose a new story here. What do I want to say? I want to say that it's super consistent, that I always pay I've always paid everything, but that I always have the same sum, and it's growing and it's consistent and it's not making 300K 1 month and then the next month I'm going to 50K, which is what I've previously been experiencing. And so really the process of that is first of all recognizing the story you're telling yourself and the emotional reds associated with that. Sometimes, when you try to sometimes you have subconscious traumas or blocks or stories that are associated to past experience, and you have adopted these stories because they're keeping you safe. And if you just try to be like, oh, let me pick a new story here, let me affirm money is consistent, I'm making so much money, while behind the scenes, there's an emotional red. There's a story that hasn't been heard, that hasn't been looked at, that hasn't been brought into the present moment, it's
Mhm.
gonna be very fucking hard for you to make that shift because your subconscious controls pretty much most of your behaviors and actions. It runs the show. So if you're trying to override that just through affirmations or positive thinking, you have 60,000 thoughts in a day. How can you even you don't you're not even aware of all of those. Like, that's really hard to do. So the first step is usually to really gain presence with the emotion itself, because you have so many thoughts in a day, they're really hard to pin down. Your beliefs, your stories are almost impossible to pin down. The way that you identify the stories that you have that are no longer serving you is through your emotions, because emotions are they communicate the prominent focus point and thoughts and beliefs that you're holding. So the emotions tell you what you're mostly fixated on or what you're mostly thinking about. And so if you're in a state of financial anxiety all the time, then that is where you start. You go, this emotion, financial anxiety. And instead of
Mhm.
shaming yourself for that, instead of trying to suppress that emotion, instead of trying to numb it, which I think is what we've been taught in our society, is use
Definitely.
medication, turn on the TV, go drink some alcohol, like just numb
Go
this
take some
shit.
Zoloft, go
It
get an
doesn't fucking work
ADHD
that way.
pill.
Yeah, no, you're just hiding the symptoms. You're not addressing the thing. Like, you can't run away from reds. It doesn't matter where you move to in the world. If you are depressed, like, that shit's gonna follow you until you address the underlying reason or story or perspective or belief that is causing that, right? So, so giving a moment of presence to that emotional red, and doing that ideally somatically. So, so many beautiful practices out there. There's, breath work, there's tapping, there's meditation, ecstatic dancing, there's EMDR, there's mudras, like there's
So
thousands of
many,
different ways to
so
gain
many.
presence with the shadow side, the dark, the heavy emotions, to bring them in the moment. And I think that is a process of self-discovery and dating yourself and seeing what you like, what resonates with you, what works for you, trying different things out, but really being present with the story, hearing it out. That's what it wants. It just wants to know that you received the communication. Like, are you hearing me? And then once you receive it in the present moment, then you can choose a new one. And that process looks by going into, so there's really like two structures that we create from. There's one where we create from problem solving, like, I want to make more money because I don't want this, or I want to find love because I'm so lonely and I'm so depressed on my own. And then there's the creative structure of, I want to create money because it's going to feel this good, and it's going to feel, you see, like energy. It's so subtle. They're both forms of creation. And, in the
But
grand
one's a
scheme of
red.
things, huh?
But one's a
One's a
red
red.
and one's a green.
One is a red that is running the show. The other one is a green. And one of my, all the work that I do basically is based upon the principle that if you are creating or behaving or acting or speaking from emotional reds, you basically fling that red into your future. It's just
Yeah.
you're creating more of that situation for yourself.
That's
And this
so
is a
important,
phenomenon
Kat.
I've observed in my life. And most people are like, oh, yeah, for sure. I've seen this happen. Like, if I yell at someone, that red, that anger, the vibration of anger comes back to me. Maybe not through that person, but it comes back to me. So, so it's a
Can we
very
go
subtle
back
shift.
to
And
can we
go
go
ahead.
back to the entrepreneur part? Because I think this is really what you touched on was so good. Can we go back to, it's kind of like you said, you throw out things and as an entrepreneur, but are you throwing out things in the red or throwing out things in the green? I would love for you to touch a little bit more about that because if you do, I agree with you. I have a little bit of that ADHD brain. I think it's my superpower, but it's also a distraction. But really, what I'm forgetting and what the world needs to hear is what you were saying. Are we creating in the red out of need, or are we creating in the green out of fun? Like,
Mm.
what are we really doing? And because as entrepreneurs, don't you think we just throw things to the wall and stick? I mean, I've changed the story around that now, but I'm just saying in general, whether you're starting out or 10 years in, unless you're aware of that. So, could you go into a little bit of that too to help the people starting their business or in the thick of it or not
Mm.
making the money that they want? Are they producing from the reds or the greens?
Yeah. So the thing is, even if you're producing from the greens, you cannot escape the fact that this and maybe this is a story I tell myself, but it is a very prominent story. This principle of duality, yin and yang, hot and cold, light and dark, contrasting emotions, duality in emotions. There's duality that's very much observable law in our reality. And so even if you're producing from the greens, you're still going to encounter challenges, or there's still things that are going to come up because this is going back to the theme of the story. Ultimately, we are storytellers. We tell stories with our lives. Everything we do, sports is a story. The clothing we wear is a story. Politics is a story. That's what the imagination loves. Everything we consume. Look at how Netflix, now there's Prime, now there's Apple TV. Like, we love stories. Social media. We cannot Kids nowadays are like 2 screens in front of them. They can't consume this shit fast enough, you know? Like, we're obsessed with it. And if you look at storytelling, the principles of storytelling, usually it follows a very similar structure where it's like the protagonist wants this. They desire this, but the thing is they lack the skills and aptitudes or the connections or resources or know-how how to attract that. So, they have this desire, and then they encounter this insurmountable challenge or this moment of challenge or whatever. And then in encountering this and solving this, they build the skills and the aptitudes and they win the day. And that is a very, very common. In fact, stories that lack that tension point don't do very well. They don't do very well in box office, they don't do very well in books, they don't do very well in direct response marketing. Like, if you're sharing your story as an entrepreneur to build your audience or build your brand, it's the tension point that creates relatability, that people are like, oh, I see myself in this person. I had this. I've experienced this. So just because you're creating in the greens doesn't mean you're never going to experience that, because it's a very important part of growth. It's how we grow. It's how we transform. The emotional reds are not evil. The contrasting force is not evil. It's not out to get you. It's there to help you rise, to the occasion. And so it's really important that you're not just creating something for the money, which I think is what I see a lot of entrepreneurs do, is like, how can I make the most money? What is the thing that makes money? Blah, 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 blah. Very few people that I've met are actually like, money is the big purpose of their lives. That's how they see it, you know? And so then what happens is, if you're just creating for the money, or just creating to make your bills, your mortgage that month, or just creating to make ends meet, the moment challenges arise, it's like you have no gas to see that through. You have nothing. There's nothing there to like push you through to help you rise up. So a big part of succeeding as an entrepreneur is like really understanding what is the song that you're here to share with this world. Like, I believe every single one of us has a song to share. I don't mean like literally a singing song, but like a
Like
craft. It could be
singing.
art. It could be a solution that you're bringing. But we all have that, and many of us will have many songs throughout our lives. Some of us will sing the same song our whole lives, which is fine, and then some of us will sing a song for a while and then get bored and That's what I had. I had a song with I built a $20 million company. That was my song. That's why I built it that big, because it was my fucking song. I loved helping people in that way until it wasn't anymore. And then I had to go find my new song. And it's when you, and some people call that dharma or purpose. When you have that behind you, it's going to really change how you're showing up and then how you're moving through the obstacles. And sometimes in life, you don't know what that is. You don't know what your song is. You're in a moment of rest and recovery. You're in intermission moment and you're testing things out. And the process is just dating, following the flow, like what the emotional greens. What do I feel excited about right now? And oftentimes that flow has nothing to do with business or money. Like I shared this publicly, how a year and a half ago, I basically hit a standstill in my business. I was doing really well in my business. And then all of a sudden, I lost my spark and I shut everything down. I had a bit of a cash runway. So I was like, I'll just write some books and figure things out. My cash runway started running out. I started to panic. I started to get into financial anxiety. I was like, oh shit, I'm going to lose my house now. And and my mind was like, you need to make money, you need to make money, how can I, and it, like, I was just, it was so the energy was so stuck, I couldn't even launch anything, I couldn't even promote anything. And when I did put stuff out, it just tanked because it was coming from those emotional reds of neediness, anxiety. Luckily I teach this stuff, so I caught myself and I like took my own medicine. It's a lot harder. It's easier to teach people than to see it in yourself, by the way. But I caught myself, it took a minute for me to do that, but I did. And I was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go into the flow. Where's the flow? And for me that was gardening. Like, it was such a random thing to build a garden, and I got lost in it. And it was like, it was the flow we're looking for is the thing that like consumes your attention, where you're thinking about it at night and you're thinking about it when you wake up and what am I going to do? And I didn't have money. So I had to be resourceful. I had to I had to make mulch out of like rotted logs on my property and like build things from wood, scrapyard wood and stuff. And it was such a rewarding experience to create something with the limited resources that I had. I felt so fulfilled. And that just, it, it like ignited this spark, and suddenly like the downloads for my business and creativity. And then I went on to do very, very well on the back of that financially. But it had nothing to do with business. It was like I was creating from the greens in a garden. And that is why I made a lot of money in my business. And so sometimes when you're really like stuck in your business, you're like talking overwhelmed, you're confused, you're frustrated, meeting a lot of emotional reds, and the energy is just stuck. It's like, take a step back and like really ask yourself, where is their passion? Where is their curiosity? Where is there something that pushes me outside of my comfort zone that I am interested in, that I have affinity with? And sit with that question if you're not sure, or date yourself. Try different things that might be appealing to you. And in that process, you will connect with the energy of flow and courage and curiosity and affinity. Those are the emotional greens that expand and create really big value exchanges. Like, business is all about people. Business is a channel, right? It's a channel for a value exchange. You're solving people's problems. You're helping people. A value exchange, like, what do people value? What we value is emotional greens. Everything we buy, do, say, everything we do is because we're trying to feel a bit better. Everything. And so if you understand that your customers are actually paying you to feel better, to be in an emotional greens, then you grasp the concept that when you yourself are leading from those states, when you yourself are embodying those states, you have a lot more value to bring to that value exchange. Like, it's because emotions are contagious. We're vibrational beings, so, um, it does most of the work for you at that
Yeah.
stage.
Thanks, Kat. Satnam, everybody. Cat Howell on Instagram, and you can find me at Awaken Change. And if you will, please rate and score our podcast 5 stars if you loved it. Okay. Bye.